We're joined now by Frank Owen, ex-submarine commander, Royal Australian Navy. Frank, you're on Talk Breakfast. Welcome.
Good morning.
I love the fact that an ex-submarine commander in the Royal Australian Navy is hard to get hold of on FaceTime. But we've finally got you, sir. Can you please respond to what's been happening over the last few days? I've spoken to many experts. There seems to be a gear change overnight. We've had, and we continue to respect the tragedy for the 5 people that lost their lives and their families. But a lot of people are now questioning what regulations. Movie director and submersible maker James Cameron, of course, came out earlier and said, the minute I heard this on Sunday, I thought this is not sustainable. Can I ask you your response as somebody who spent a large part of their lives underwater in submarines?
Sure. And the part of my life underwater that's relevant to this is really to do with the Submarine Escape and Rescue Project. So a Navy is governed by the rules that it sets in place for its own submarines, its own people. The offshore oil and gas industry manages the risks that it might face for loss of its own programs and its own output by getting the advice of independent experts. It's not compelled to get this clearance or certification from Lloyd's, DNV or anybody else, but they do it to manage their risks so they can be certain and to put in place backup systems and everything else to make sure that these submersibles can bring their people back and not be subject to massive losses. If there's research bodies such as universities that use submersibles, they will have responsibilities. These are like corporate social responsibilities that they will have to their own stakeholders. When you, however, get an individual who is the stakeholder and the shareholder in the organisation that is undertaking this activity, in a way, that person is beholden to no one but himself. And so it'll be the market itself that will determine whether or not the would-be tourists would actually take part in this sort of tourism.
Frank, when you saw that submersible, you're an experienced person. Put it in layman's terms. When you saw that, what was your first feeling? I'm told that the water pressure is the equivalent of 9 tower blocks made of lead on your head.
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. And what I saw there was an extremely simple tube with some items in it. I didn't see the sort of backup systems that I'd expect to see. They don't have to be copper pipes and everything else like that an older submarine might have, but I would expect to see more than single items without backups. Even their communications system, if they're on the surface or near the surface, is a small satellite antenna that talks via text message to Starlink, an Elon Musk satellite, and directly from that back to the mothership. There's therefore no way to talk to any of the searching forces should something go wrong. So it very much seems that it's been designed and set up just to do the job it's intended to do, which is fine, but with no consideration for how they're going to operate it should their expected concept of operations not fall into place.
Do you think that the tragedy of the last few days, the catastrophic implosion, and we can talk endlessly, but for me I think it's important. The most important question is the following one. Do you think as a result of this tragedy, regulation will intensify, changes will be made, and hopefully a tragedy like this, of course there's tragedy all over the world. Things happen, things break, but I'm talking about, from my point of view, on Monday when somebody who'd been in submarines all his life said, well, it's flimsy, it's fiberglass. I hear the word flimsy, I hear 360 times the water pressure, and I'm absolutely amazed that that can take place. And I've had the conversations about exploration / thrill seeking. I'm just wondering from your point of view, do you think that the world of that sort of trip changes after the tragedy of yesterday?
It may well do. The problem is that you can have all the regulations in the world, but they have to be imposed by somebody. And if you're operating on the high seas, you are actually beholden to nobody except perhaps the United Nations, and they don't get into that sort of activity. So even when these deep ROVs, for example, are mobilised to St John's and they sail out, they're not the authorities who allow it to sail aren't that concerned about the ROV itself. They're concerned, and so is the ship, that it's properly secured to the deck, that it won't move around and become dislodged, causing damage to their own ship. So there is nobody to wave that stick and say, no, you can't do this. It has to be at the behest of the organisation that's conducting it.
Benedict, in terms of what Frank says, and he spent his life in submarines, he absolutely understands that regulations need to happen. He's implying that would be very difficult to police. It's true, isn't it?
Well, yeah, simply because of the sheer size of the area that we're talking about. You know, the sort of the nature of the exploration that we're talking about. It's, you know, we find it difficult enough to police the Channel. You know, how on earth are you going to police, you know, the open ocean where, you know, there are questions over different people's jurisdiction? But regulation will be very important ultimately, because, you know, if you have people potentially interfering with shipwrecks and the like, you know, there are very real implications for that. I mean, one thing that hasn't really been touched upon very often is the number of shipwrecks that are being plundered for the things that are currently there, and the rules around that, whether or not that's legal. You know, so I think that it's something that does need to be looked into. But I think he's right. You know, it's incredibly difficult to say, well, whose job is it to sort of, you know, what international world police, you know, can you spare and fund to police permanent shipwrecks?
And Frank, the other thing, just to finish quickly, other countries with different maritime rules and different agendas and whatever, it is undoubtedly a tragedy. It undoubtedly sheds a very strong light on that sort of trade. And, you know, of course, it's a tragedy for the families, but I think that OceanGate certainly, and maybe other companies that will have to adopt a very different approach. Frank Owen, ex-submarine commander at Royal Australian Navy, thank you for joining us on Talk Breakfast. Almost 20 past 8. If you want to be on 0355, no it isn't, 0344 499 1000. Text to 87222. We'll go back after the break to the thing that everybody wants to talk about,